I'm really bad at making lists of my favorite things, be they music, TV shows, movies, video games, food, whatever. Generally, if I really like something, it just goes into the "this is one of my favorites of this thing" category, and I move on. Despite this difficulty establishing a ranking for things, Mad Max Fury Road occupies the top spot of my favorite movie of all time quite often, and it never really leaves the top 3. From the practical effects in the cars, the world building and the lore, and the absolute masterclass of cinematography, I'm honestly not nearly objective enough to find anything bad to say about the movie. It's badassery incarnate, and if you don't like it, you're just wrong. Don't at me, I won't budge on this. Mad Max and its dystopian end-of-the-world wasteland, full of war boys, corrupt warlords, and heavy metal cars turned death machines, is a series near and dear to my heart. What that says about me other than I'm awesome and I have spectacular taste, I have no idea, but it does suggest that a video game based off of Mad Max is either going to be the best of times for me or the worst of times. It had high potential to be the worst of times for me because, let's face it, movie tie-in games don't exactly have a stellar track record throughout the years, and frankly, I'd rather no Mad Max game than a Mad Max game that makes me weep salty, bitter tears of rage at what they did to my boy.
Look how they massacred my boy.
But praise the holy combustion because those nuts at Avalanche Studio actually pulled it off. Mad Max the game, which I will heretofore refer to as Mad Max because I'm not being paid by the word count here, or at all actually, is an open world action adventure, exploration, drive, gun, punch, loot, race, shooty bang bang game with so many things about it that are awesome and an unfortunate number of things that are not. Mad Max was made by developer Avalanche Studios and produced by Warner Brothers Interactive Entertainment, and it was released all the way back in 2015, which means I waited 7 years to play a game that is sort of more or less based off of one of my favorite movies of all time. I'm gonna blame that long delay on fearing that Mad Max would turn into one of those horrible, bad, no good, stain on humanity variety of video game movie tie-ins. But let me tell you, Mad Max may be one of the most underrated games ever, and I think it would be an almost impossible challenge to find another movie-based game that was as well done while being as overlooked. I cannot emphasize enough what an absolute shame it is that Mad Max did not get nearly as much love and recognition for all the things it does right. And just to show that that's not incredibly biased of me, it is, there are some areas of Mad Max that just plain and simply fell short. Hell, there are a few aspects of this game that I honestly find to be downright shit. But the areas where Mad Max does deliver are so solid, so satisfying, so engaging that I would look at the sometimes glaring flaws and shortcomings and say, I see you, I just don't care, and go back to plugging away at the game. When I can look at something that is as obviously notably flawed about a game and just keep playing as if those things don't even matter, that goes beyond a good game and into something special. I'm not going to go through every aspect of the plot with a fine-tooth comb. This isn't a story analysis video or anything like that, but I will be touching on some of the parts that are more impactful and important to why this game is good, as well as looking at some of the ways that the story fails. I don't feel like discussing a lot of the things in the game are really going to spoil the gameplay experience all that much, because I don't really feel like the strengths of the game lie in the surprises or spectacle moments. Instead, the strongest parts of the game revolve around gameplay, the various game systems at work, and an overall strong adherence to the source material. Still, if you're the type of person that's sensitive to spoilers, this is not a strictly spoiler-free review, so come back and watch it after you've given the game a try. The basic story of Mad Max starts with Max wandering through the wasteland, fighting off war boys, running into warlords, getting his shit taken, then impaling said warlord's dome on a chainsaw. You know, standard stuff Max does on a Tuesday. This brute's name is Scabrous Scrotus, and I can't decide if this name is painful or badass, so we're just gonna settle with painfully badass and call it a day. Surprisingly, we haven't heard the last of this beefy boy, but for now, he's gonna take a nice little nappy with his new face accessory. Shortly after chainsawing Scrotus and adopting a doggo, Max runs into Chumb. Chumb is a black thumb, basically a master mechanic, and I'm pretty sure he was a Spartan in a previous life, or at the very least he played one on TV.
Leonidas!
Chumb is something of a religious fanatic, if by religion you mean he's sexually attracted to cars, and no, I'm not even joking this time.
Praise be! Her juices flow!
Chumb is awesome. He's hilarious, he's insane, he says the most wildly outlandish things imaginable, and he worships Max as a quote-unquote saint because of how good of a driver he is. Because apparently being a good driver makes you a holy person if your religion basically boils down to, my god goes vroom vroom. Chumb does a lot of heavy lifting in this game. Max is pretty committed to the whole strong silent type shtick and doesn't exactly provide a ton of conversation. Although in all fairness, he does surprise you at times with some of the things that he does have to say, but we'll come back to that later. The Chumpster makes up for this by being a regular chatty Cathy and doing a lot of the explaining and expositioning about what is going on around us, who's who in the wasteland, and generally fleshing out details of the game through flavorful and amusing monologues.
Modded and made to measure? You want some of that old-time religion, huh? I got a classic whammy turbo high dog, huh? Hell yeah! Bulletproof and torture tested, statically upgraded with Chumb overdrive. Yeah, exactly. 8 is the magic number. You and me, we're gonna land a big chief! A bona fide bad boy. Huh? 429 cubic inches, 460 horses, holy rolling. Nobody could touch you on the blacktop day or night. Why, you'd be evergreen, eternal, road tripping with the gods. It's true! Oh, bring it forward to the altar of this lowly acolyte. There she is. Continue to remain await the big chief. I will wed the big chief to the angel in a rev, and then we'll see.
This can lean toward being something of an exposition dump at times, but almost all of it is given to you as you go speeding down the half-buried highways and barren plains of the wastelands, moving from objective to objective, so the game doesn't hold you hostage for it, and the explanations help to fill in the travel time. Chumb also serves as our wingman, operating several weapons on our vehicle and repairing damages inflicted so that we can get rolling down the road again. Most importantly, he's a mechanic, one talented enough to build his own vehicles. Since Max's famed interceptor got yoinked during the fight with Scrotus and seems to have been carted off to Gastown, the most fortified stronghold in the region, Max has need of a new set of wheels, and this is where Chumb comes in. Most of the game is spent in pursuit of a worthy vehicle for Max's road warring, and then the upgrades and augmentations of this vehicle, specifically and most centrally a V8 engine.
V8, not V6.
V8 engines are something of a rare and coveted precious resource in post-apocalyptic Down Underland. We're gonna dive into that very soon. Let's talk graphics, art design, and general visual presentation. This was a really mixed bag for me, and it won't be the last area of the game that we cover that has a firm foot in both the good and bad camp. There are times when the game looks phenomenal, when it absolutely nails exactly what you would want from a Mad Max game on an aesthetic level, and there are times when it looks like just plain dog shit. The character designs, the strongholds and outposts, the vehicles, various ruins, anything to do with parts of the world that actual humans have some kind of part in is often spot on in terms of fitting into what you would expect from a Mad Max game and matches up pretty well with lore and world building from the Mad Max movies. This ranges from the twisted bodies of deformed characters, the tattered and withered clothes often sporting ornamentation cobbled together from various scraps, the wild and perilous designs of various cars and war rigs, and a decent bit of the war boy and raider camps and fortresses you infiltrate have some great visuals. We gotta acknowledge the bad camp of the visuals and art design and direction now, and if we're being honest, a lot of that is tied to the open world elements of the game, so we might as well tackle that now too. The open world elements of Mad Max are my biggest gripe of the game by far, so we might as well get this out of the way now. Mad Max's open world design is bad. Not unplayably bad, but bad as in it's the same open world design that you've played over and over and over again ad nauseum. It is the literal definition of an Ubisoft open world game. I have such a hate boner for Mad Max's open world design that I'm making an entire separate video about specifically the open world so I can pour over it to my heart's content. The briefest summary possible is that Mad Max's open world suffers from all the bad elements you'll find in every standard cookie cutter open world that follows the Ubisoft formula. A huge portion of the open world is a brown, blasted wasteland. Whether this takes the form of rolling desert sands or sun-blasted brown rocks and crags, it's all there. There's some small variance in the regions here and there, and to be fair, the last area of the game is pretty distinctly different from the rest, but aside from that, the vast majority of the open world is very samey. For the most part, the differences are going to be too small and too subtle to notice as you're driving through the wasteland at top speed. An unfortunately large number of points of interest and relevant locations on the map are likewise unoriginal and uninspired. I know that open worlds can't really have 100% original unique locations for every point of interest on the map. Some reusing of assets is inevitable unless you keep your open world very tightly focused and relatively small. It's just impossible to make a giant sprawling map with all original places. It's too much land to cover. But I can still point at the best examples of original, inspired, and really well done open worlds and say that the majority of them have memorable locations, places that I could still remember years down the road. And in Mad Max, outside of the required linear main story missions, a majority of the open world blends into a sameness that left me longing for some variety. Between the lack of many visually compelling spectacles and landmarks to make the world truly stand out, and a lack of discovery or exploration that almost all Ubisoft games suffer from, I didn't have any of the key elements inherent to truly well-designed open worlds to compel me to experience the world and engage with all it has to offer. And yet I did. I played through all of the main game and a vast swath of the side content. Sure, I didn't do a 100% completionist run or anything like that, but I played through the game, completing the game's chore list and random repetitive, pointless tasks over and over and over again, far beyond the point where my interest in the monotone open world had waned. Not for love of the open world, not for any actual inbuilt discovery, not for any real drive to explore. Far after the scant unique elements of the world had worn thin, I continued to go to each point of interest and complete the tasks assigned for me for the simple sake of the Magnum Opus. Oh yes, let's discuss the Magnum Opus. To do that, however, with an understanding of what we're looking at, let's discuss a few other elements of note. Firstly, core gameplay mechanics. Any Mad Max game wouldn't be complete without cars, more cars, and most importantly, really violent, ferocious, fast, intensely badass cars. Almost all traversal across the wide open world map is done by car, driving along the ruined remnants of roads and over the desolate flatlands, along the deep, shadowy canyons, and jumping across the jagged ledges of rocky cliff sides. Avalanche Studios seemed to know that Mad Max would live or die by its car combat, and it's fortunate that they applied this knowledge to not only waging battle with war rigs, cars, and other vehicles, but even just driving around in general is enjoyable and engaging, making the actual traversal of the open world a great experience, even if the open world itself is not. Throughout the course of the game, you are able to unlock a wide variety of vehicles, all of which handle differently, have different speeds and maneuverability and durability, even different weaponry and offensive options. But if I'm honest, I engaged with very few of these vehicles. Because really, why would you when you have full access to the Magnum Opus? This is your car, your vehicle, a car to rule over all cars, a true powerhouse of offense, defense, speed, and durability. It's a core part of the story itself, as the majority of Max's purpose is focused on finding and building the Opus up and creating a better, more capable, more powerful vehicle to survive the wild wastelands where a good vehicle can keep someone alive in a way that a simple gun often can't. But just as importantly as how fun the Magnum Opus is to drive, at least to my little gremlin gamer brain, is the Opus is customizable. Like big time customizable. You can customize everything from the body design, to the paint job, to the armor, to the engines. You can add a harpoon gun, an explosive launcher, and gigantic flamethrowers on the side that I hardly ever use but are totally badass anyways. And all these customization options aren't just skin deep. Rather than being simple cosmetic covers and nothing more, every aspect of the Magnum Opus directly impacts the way the car performs, from top speed to acceleration, handling and maneuverability, offensive and defensive abilities, and many other aspects. There's some depth to actual strategizing and making decisions in how you use your customizable options too, as you can't simply slap on the best version of every category and call it a day. Equipping the most durable armor onto the Opus is also equipping the heaviest armor. You'll be able to take a lot more punishment, but it'll also slow the Opus down and make it more difficult to maneuver. Stripping away the heavy spikes covering your car will make it more agile, but it'll also leave you vulnerable to being boarded by war boys. Different suspensions and tires allow you to drive better on particular types of terrain, be they roads, rock faces, sand dunes, or even the rare but supremely annoying boggy wetlands. Heavier weaponry can weigh your rig down further, but also deals much more extensive damage when you run into enemy patrols. Depending on which flamers you equip to the Opus, you can have longer use, less damaging flames that also do a better job of conserving fuel, or a massive fire-spewing hose of death that burns right through your enemies and your fuel tanks until they're bone dry. All these variables make customizing the Magnum Opus engaging and relevant to your actual gameplay experience, on top of the satisfaction of making your ride look badass. And so much of the side content, task fulfillment, and exploration of the open world was tied to unlocking new options on the Opus that, despite my dissatisfaction with the dull open world itself, I couldn't stop myself from going through it like a damn near completionist just to unlock more shiny car parts. I honestly applaud Mad Max for figuring out a viable lure to get players to engage with its open world while simultaneously loathing the game for so effectively hooking me despite the open world's one-note nature. In addition to the fantastic Magnum Opus, we can also make various upgrades and improvements to Max himself. Like the Magnum Opus, these upgrades and unlockables are both cosmetic and functional, letting Max gain increased defense, strength, ammo capacity for his shotgun, improvements to his shotgun itself, new melee moves and skills, and most importantly of all, customization options for his beard and facial hair. It's also possible to unlock permanent buffs and upgrades to stats and attributes for Max through Griffa tokens, which can be turned into a local shaman in exchange for drug trips. Yes, drug trips. Max does drugs. The world's a mess. It's fine. During our journey through the wasteland, we end up visiting several fortresses, which can also be upgraded and fixed up, turning them from rundown, crumbling shells of civilization to slightly less rundown, crumbling shells of civilization that also restock your health and ammo and water supplies when you visit. All of these upgrades, as well as making each different territory you adventure through free of the many bandits and tribal patrols, and thus more safe for less assholey common folk living in the regions, are all tied to completion of the many exhaustive errands and task markers littering the map. I feel such polar opposite emotions about these parts of the open world design. On the one hand, clearing outposts, collecting scrap at the small camps and ruins, destroying the various bandit tribes, taking out convoys, actively roving around the remnants of roads and highways, finding parts and pieces of fortress projects, clearing out totems, shooting down snipers, uncovering historical relics, collecting information from informants and scouts, and doing the very rare actually fleshed out and interesting side quests are almost all activities that will become mind-numbingly boring and completely monotonous by the first few hours of play, which will really only scratch the surface of the full laundry list of activities to complete. Eventually, I hated just how much there was to do, how much of it was the same, and how little of it had any actual bearing on fully exploring characters, quests, original content, or notably distinct areas. By the time it was all said and done, it was the very epitome of a rote-for-rote open-world Ubisoft formula. And I loathe it so much at this point that I am actively having blood pressure spikes as I'm writing this script, and again, right now in front of you as I am actively reading this script, and that's weeks after I finished the game. However, Mad Max does such a great job of giving you actual tangible rewards across a multitude of systems and upgrades, all of which in some way directly engage with the game and how it plays. Despite the monotony of all the repetitive quests, it actually feels worth it to engage with. Not for the quests, not for interest in the world, but because you actually get something for slogging through it. You really do get a very well-developed sense of progression and power creep in a good way, as you put in the effort of ticking objectives off the long to-do list. And this shows up in so many ways, between the Magnum Opus becoming a badass deathmobile, to Max becoming an absolute human wrecking ball, to your fortresses becoming more complex and your regions less bandit-ridden. And did I mention that the people in the forts even recognize your efforts? You go from each fortress's people just trusting you and saying slanderous shit, to gaining the common folks' begrudging respect. respect to eventually everybody revering you as a legendary road warrior who frees them all from the constant tyranny of Scrotus's forces. Mad Max nails all the elements of rewarding you for all your hard work, and I can't not give it the respect it deserves for making the juice worth the squeeze, even as the squeeze itself is one-note, uninspired, and painful. The satisfaction of these rewards go hand in hand with how satisfying and enjoyable the gameplay overall is, specifically combat both on foot and car variety. The combat really carries the game far, as driving the various death machines, but mostly Magnum Opus, and getting into car-on-car battles is viscerally enjoyable. Players are given a wide range of options for these car battles, from blasting fuel tanks with your shotgun, yanking doors, tires, and even the drivers themselves off of the vehicles using your harpoon gun, or firing a makeshift rocket launcher at vehicles to blow them out of existence. You can also ram into vehicles with a giant battering ram on the front of your car, or use the spiky grinder set into your wheels and giant flamethrowers to damage cars as you come alongside them. A combination of these various tactics mean you can engage a whole convoy of war rigs and attacked vehicles at a time, mixing and matching your tactics as you go, or deciding which method of attack you like best and sticking to it. The game does a faithful job of recreating the mood and vibe of the chase and car battle segments of Fury Road and other Mad Max films, conveying the intensity and weight of the over-the-top violence beautifully. The hand-to-hand battles with large groups of enemies is similar in design to the Batman Arkham series, the Lord of the Rings Shadow of Mordor series, or the Amazing Spider-Man series, centering around various combos and finishers while also focusing on blocks, counters, and parries on incoming attacks from surrounding foes. And I'm gonna say it, those other more well-known series did a great job with their combat, but Mad Max honestly feels better in almost every way. Everything feels weightier, more punchy, more gritty and satisfying. Max does far less of the wild jumping and leaping that characterizes all the other games in this kind of combat, instead feeling grounded and hard-nosed. While Max is no superhero as in the other cases, his former life as a policeman and all his time surviving in the post-apocalyptic wasteland has made him into quite the fighter. Not only do you have the usual punches and kicks, as well as access to shivs for quick finishers and your trusty shotgun as a quick get-out-of-jail solution to being overwhelmed, Max also has Fury mode after hitting enough successful attacks or counters, adding weight to his punches and allowing him to suplex his enemies to the ground in some truly punishing slams that either stun them or outright kill them. And if you manage to time a perfect block on an incoming attack, Max will perform counter joint locks and disarms, many of which are the most accurate to real fighting techniques that I've seen in gaming. Max can also use various melee weapons that he finds lying around the area or strips off of attackers. And these are almost always grisly makeshift weapons that are very on point for the tone and aesthetic of the series. Most importantly, combat feels fun and enjoyable, and it does a great job of balancing challenge with power fantasy throughout most of the game. I'll never get tired of suplexing some poor war boy onto his skull and watching his friends shrink back from my brutality. Where the open world and exploration of Mad Max fail, the gameplay in battles, be it on foot or driving, is a deeply satisfying experience that only grows even more enjoyable as you unlock more features. It's unfortunate that the open world can't match the quality of the other systems in the game. I've wondered if limiting or even entirely removing the open world component would have made the game better, and ultimately I don't think that completely removing the open world would have worked for this game, particularly given the way that it blends car combat and driving segments with on-foot combat. Making the game more linear and self-contained would have likely necessitated a chopping and breaking up of on-foot segments and driving segments in a way that I think would have just come across as disjointed and poorly flowing. I think that a smaller, more focused open world would have been perfect for Mad Max, but then there are about a dozen or two changes that they could have made to make the open world more engaging and immediately satisfying, or not. Maybe it would have completely destroyed the game entirely. What do I know? I'm not a developer. I'm just a guy on the internet that likes talking about games and hates Ubisoft. That said, I could write an entire video based on what I disliked about Mad Max's open world, and I fucking will. For now, simply know that Mad Max's open world has made my disappointment immense and my day has been ruined. Only the major, and I mean Herculean heavy lifting of Mad Max's strong points and best features, such as the combat, the driving, the upgrade systems, and some really solid writing and acting has saved this game. Beyond its lackluster open world design, one of my biggest gripes with Mad Max has to be the pacing. I'll preface this with admitting that it's sort of my fault, while still understanding that it's still an issue. See, I spent a sizable chunk of the mid-game of Mad Max getting lost in a sandbox that I hated. I've said it ad nauseum at this point, but I really didn't care for the open world of Mad Max. But for all that, I did engage with a huge part of the optional content of completing the game's to-do list and checking all the menial tasks off of it in order to further access the mini upgrades and improvements of both Max and the Magnum Opus. And yes, a huge part of this is optional, and yes, I did choose to voluntarily engage with it, clearing out bandit camps and chasing down resources, leveling up my strongholds, and lowering all the region's threat levels. And the pursuit of that to-do list excellence killed the pacing of Mad Max big time, and I can't entirely blame the game for that. Except I'm still going to, and there's two reasons for that. First and foremost, I've played more than a few open world games with a mountain of side content that have nothing to do with the main storyline, and I'm pretty in the habit of exhaustively pouring through that content once I can access it and completing it before moving on with the main story content. And when the game has strongly designed quest lines and content, be they the main story or quests, side quests, and various optional content, the pacing of the game doesn't suffer the same lag and drag as Mad Max and other open world games, because it all feels relevant, exciting, and interesting. The hallmark of good side content, good side quests, and optional objectives is when it feeds the main central storyline and makes it seem stronger, not weaker. If I have the sense of a fulfilled and complete journey throughout a world by engaging with the side content, as opposed to just feeling like I'm doing busy work and then coming back to a series of events that I've practically forgotten, then that is excellent open world design. I can't tell you how many countless hours of monster hunting and side quests, exploration, and investigation work I put into The Witcher 3 between one main quest and another, or how many hidden caves and ruins I explored in Skyrim or Elden Ring before paying a single thought to the actual primary storyline. Yet I never felt like the pacing of those games were broken or like I was as thoroughly taken out of the experience of what I was doing or what the overarching direction of the game was in those titles the way I did in Mad Max. There was times while playing this game that I had absolutely no clue what was happening in the main story, or what I was supposed to do to advance it, or what Max's motivations were moving forward aside from get a V8.
V8, not V6.
But there were bandit camp markers on my map, so I guess that's what I'm gonna go do, because I can't stand these fucking markers cluttering up my map, and I don't have anything better to do, and I need new tires. Can you believe how expensive new tires are, even in the post-apocalypse? Even more egregiously, even if they were to fix these complaints about the open world and side quest elements killing the pacing, I would still have a major gripe because the main story itself is horrendously paced. This isn't to say that the story and its elements are necessarily bad. There's several moments in the story that are legitimately compelling. We get to see a number of characters that are well written, with great dialogue and reasonably strong, if not knockout acting, except for Jason Spisak, who voiced Chumb and pretty much carried this entire game's voice acting performances on his hunched and misshapen back. Someone get this man all the voice acting awards now.
Please, we aim to enter the Dead Barrens, and all my gear, it was destroyed by infidel scavengers, and we need to heal this machine. If you let us work here, why, with his saintly wheel hands and my black fingers, we will deliver to you a bona fide grease pit. Praise be the prophet.
Major standout moments for the story are found in the story arc featuring the concubine Hope and her daughter Glory. We meet Hope at multiple points throughout the story as she is sold from one camp to another, ultimately ending up as a prize to the winner of a death race Max participates in an effort to win a V8 engine for the Opus.
V8.
The results of this race ends up going sideways as a quite alive Scrotus shows up and holy hell, he has the chainsaw still stuck in his head. Yo, homie, you might want to get that looked at. That's definitely infected. Max gets beat up and locked up, but Hope helps him escape under the condition that he helps her find her daughter Glory, who has been shipped off to what amounts to a child labor camp under an old airport that has been made into a huge series of tunnels and small interconnected caves full of hostile war boys with an affinity for the dark. The airport segment of the game is one of its highlights for its variety and layout and the unique, heavy, tense atmosphere. The ruins of the airport weighing down oppressively on you, the air around you thick with dust, dirt, and who knows what else as you venture into the dark in search of the lone child in the war boy-infested tunnels. Equally standout about this segment of the game are the interactions between Max and Glory. Being near the child seems to open a crack in Max's until then very nearly impenetrable stone-faced facade. With some very rare exceptions, Max is a hardened, brooding, often brutally uncaring, shell-shocked survivor of the world's most ugly days. Having to care for and protect Glory and keep her calm as they escape the tunnels and make their way back to Hope shows us a facet of Max's personality that would probably be considered tender in anyone who wasn't, basically a murdering psychopath. I won't play-by-play the full series of tragic events that unfold with Hope and Glory. Like I said, this isn't really meant to be a beat-for-beat recap of the game's story. There are some pretty decent story moments before and after the segments revolving around Hope and Glory, but their segments of the plot stand out to me the most because they show the most depth to Max's character. I particularly like these narrative beats because they stick so close to Max as we have come to understand him in the movies. The small, almost missable moments of compassion beneath his hardened and uncaring exterior showing a glimpse of the good man he once was before the world fell into ruin. The writing manages to convey some nuance to Max. It shows us some layers and depth to his character, that there is something lurking under that fiercely hard exterior, while not making him betray the very principles and instincts that helped him to survive all this time. That's a hard balance to strike, but one that the game nails, and one that remains consistent with Max and his characterization in movies and other media. The quality of these storytelling beats only serve to exacerbate what a shame it was that these crucial moments in the plot came so late into an often threadbare story. So much of the core story revolves around simply obtaining a V8 engine so Max can make his pilgrimage across the Plains of Silence, an alleged place of peace and solitude that Max is seeking both in-game and in the Fury Road movie. I was basically checked out of the story by the time the best story beats and most engaging plot lines finally kicked in. Because the pacing was so poorly done, by the time I really got invested in Max, Hope, Glory, and all the other major Wasteland drama players, the game was practically over. I've laid a lot of criticism on the table throughout this video. Mad Max is no flawless diamond. It has a multitude of shortcomings and flaws, some of them running quite deep, that held the game back from being an absolutely brilliant entry in the upper echelons of open world sandboxes. But for all the ways that it falls short, it comes roaring back to life in enough key areas that I can't help but love Mad Max in spite of its flaws and ugliness. The gameplay and dedication to Mad Max's overall tone and atmosphere hit such high marks that I can easily overlook my gripes about the poorly executed open world and hit and miss pacing of its story purely on the simple thrill of exhilarating car battles and brutal fisticuffs alone. Combining these with the unique characters and style that are in line with the flavor and world building of Mad Max, and the best hunchbacked car-worshipping grease monkey sidekick to ever grace gaming, made Mad Max one of the best movie franchise games I've ever played. For all its flaws and chips, Mad Max is still a brilliant if rough-edged gem, buried in the grime of a ruined world caked in blood, gunpowder, and gasoline. Thanks for checking out my video. If you enjoyed my video on Mad Max, consider leaving a like and subscribing for future gaming content. Let me know what you thought of Mad Max in the comments below. Have you played it? And if so, where do you think it measures up against other movie gaming franchises? Gaming movie franchises? Movie franchise games. Whatever. If you'd like to see more of my content, check out my video somewhere on games that have a great vibe, or take a look at my review on Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. Big thank you to my Patreons for all your support. If you'd like to support a bearded ginger man who rants about video games that he likes way too much, consider joining these fine chaps by clicking the link in the description for my Patreon. Until next time, remember,
V8, not V6.
stay salty, nerds.